Welcome to the Pro Aging Podcast. I'm Steve Gurney, founder of the Positive Aging Community. We're thrilled to have you join us for interactive discussions with pioneers and thought leaders on a wide variety of topics related to aging and longevity. These insightful discussions and the Positive Aging Sourcebook are brought to you thanks to the support from our Positive Aging Community champions. Visit proaging.com to connect with them and discover hundreds of valuable other resources. We're excited to have you with us today, so let's jump into an engaging Positive Aging live and interactive discussion. All right, folks, I am excited today to be with Dr. Beverly Thorn, who has just written this book, Before I Lose My Own Mind. Beverly, thanks so much for joining us today. And before we dive into the book and you share some of your stories and resources, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to being a thought leader in this space and writing this book.
Sure. So I'm a psychologist, and I'm a clinical psychologist and also trained in the neurosciences. So I know a lot about the brain. And I was at the University of Alabama for 30 years as a professor of psychology, and I worked with people with chronic illness. And then in 2013, my husband was officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Ooh. And he subsequently had dementia, and we can talk about the differences between the disease, the cause, and the dementia, the symptoms. But he subsequently was diagnosed with dementia, and I became the person caring for somebody with a chronic illness. And I was able to care for him with help, and he passed in 2020. And after that time, I got training as an end-of-life doula because I wanted to further understand my grief. And I also wanted to further understand the process of dying and see if we could ease that process in a better way. And learned a lot about that. I don't practice as a doula, but I do teach and speak a lot. And that's in my book as well. Yeah,
that's great. And before we dive into the book, I think so many people are not familiar with the profession or the training. Many end-of-life doulas are volunteers, but there's folks can hire an end-of-life doula to help through the end-of-life process. Tell us a little bit about that profession and the role that it fills.
Right. If I had known about the profession of end-of-life doula, I would have definitely hired an end-of-life doula for us toward Walt's, as Walt became more severely disabled by dementia. End-of-life doulas don't follow the same necessary guidelines that hospice does. For example, hospice, you have to be within 6 months of dying, and then Medicare, at the moment anyway, takes care of all of those expenses. If you qualify for hospice, you don't have to qualify for hospice to hire an end-of-life doula. Often that happens at the point where you get a life-changing diagnosis. And if you know about end-of-life doulas, one can step in and help you with the process of values clarification and learning about what you want and communicating that and documenting that. And that's what I focus a lot on from my training.
I love it.
And it's so useful.
I agree. I mean, I'm glad that you led in with that because we can't talk about that profession and just more progressive ways of looking at end of life and the caregiving role. So how about this? Let me share my screen. And folks, if you're listening on audio, I'm at Dr. Dr. Beverly Thorn, THORN.com. And that's a real easy way to click over and to be able to buy Dr. Thorn's book. But what I love about your website is if you scroll down, you've got this Before I Lose My Own Mind online resource directory. And what I love about this is broken into the three same parts of your book. Your book is divided
Right.
into these three parts. Part
Right.
one, pre-diagnosis, diagnosis, and early progression. Part two, crazy time, serious disease progression. And part three, life after Walt. And let's kind of dive into the book. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about this organization and how that might help some of us as we're navigating this for ourselves, our loved ones, or our
Sure.
clients.
Sure. And by the way, I should mention that this book is written for the caregiver. And
Okay.
I focus my efforts on care for the caregiver because there's a lot of information about out there about caring for your loved one with dementia. When you need them to take a shower, this is what you do. When you need to distract them, this is what you do. But I found fewer resources available for care for the caregiver. And it is a very taxing, lonely job, and it's a long-term job. So that's what inspired me to write the book in the first place. And I thought I better start with long before Walt was diagnosed. He was already sensing something wrong in his brain. In 2004, he came home from the university. He was also a faculty member and senior associate dean of the business school, an economist, brilliant. He came home and he said, "There's something wrong." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I can't do everything in my head like I used to be able to do, like mere mortals do." He couldn't do just, the supermortal stuff anymore. And I thought that was silly. Um, but he sensed something. Now,
Mhm.
notice he wasn't even diagnosed until 2013. So that's one of the amazing things about this disease is we now know that dementia and other dementia causing diseases start way before the dementia does. That means your brain has workarounds. That means your brain is able to adapt and cope until a tipping point. And so the
Mhm.
research, we've got to have the research continue so that we know what the tipping point is and how to prevent the tipping point.
And Beverly, more than likely, Walt was experiencing some of these symptoms, let's say, but he was brave enough to verbalize it to you. I
Yes.
oftentimes we have folks on who will talk about how, oh yeah, I mean, I've been dealing with this for 3 years, but I just, you know, finally verbalized it to my loved ones or my doctor
Right.
when it really seemed significant.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, the pre-diagnosis, the diagnosis, the early progression, part one, great resources there. Um, the okay, let's. Is it okay to move to part two, which is crazy time, serious disease progression?
I can move to part two, but I'd rather tell you just a little bit more about part one because
Oh, I'd love it.
I selected a chapter from each section
Oh, good.
to sort of give you a sense of a chapter and what's in there. Each chapter begins with a personal story about where Walt and I were at in terms of pre-diagnosis or diagnosis or early dementia. But each section has various chapters, and then each chapter has some facts and insights to them and some electronic resources. And what you see, what you're
Wow.
scrolling to right there are the electronic resources that are available. And one of the reasons I put them up on my website like that is I wanted everybody to have free access to them. The other reason I put them up there like that is because, as you know, websites are sometimes unstable. So a couple times a month, I go through these websites, and if I find that there are any broken links, I correct them. So this is the correct version always. If you have a hard copy of the book, you can still go to this correct version, and then you won't have to type in all over the websites either.
Wow,
But I,
what a great resource. I wish all publisher or authors did that. So
well,
yeah.
yeah. So I picked out a chapter, and I happened to pick out, let's see, what chapter is it? It was chapter 7. And it was a problematic thing that happened to me early on in Walt's dementia. I went to a professional talk, and the person giving the talk said, remember, you have to take care of yourself because caregivers die first, which really startled me.
Huh.
And the truth of the matter is, that's not what the research says. Caregivers do not die first. But think about that from a caregiver's point of view. If I'm a caregiver and I'm already freaking out, wondering what in the heck's going to happen, and then I'm told I'm going to die first, is that going to motivate me? No, it's going to paralyze me. And that's
Yeah.
what it did. I dove into the research, and I realized that she had misinterpreted the research. And
Mhm.
I communicated with her, which I think is a very important thing. So in this chapter, I pick out a few more gems of what I've heard or written. For example, you have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your loved one. Well, there's other reasons to take care of yourself, like you're worth taking care of yourself just because you are a person. And
Mhm.
so I changed some of these messages that are flawed around to give people a different perspective on what sometimes well-meaning professionals will say, and they may be inaccurate or they may not work for you. And I recommend, and I do recommend in the book, when that happens, when you go, oh, don't like that, to talk to the professional and say, where were you coming from with that? Because this is how I interpret it. Because if you interpreted it that way, there are
Others might.
others who have,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I like how because I have heard some of these statements about caregiver stress and this, that, and the other. And one of the things, this is just my perspective, is that none of us know who's going to die first. I mean,
No,
none of us know when we're going to die. And so, but I guess, and maybe what this professional was talking about is because we don't know, you have to be prepared for both scenarios.
sure,
And it may not be dying, it may be throwing your back out, transferring your
sure.
husband to, which puts you in the hospital for a few days. So, okay, who's going to take care of him if that happens?
Right, right. And so absolutely being prepared for every eventuality is a very important thing, because we try to, there's a book that's a great book. It's called Prepare for the Best. And no, sorry, hope for the best and prepare for the rest. And that's really what it's all about. And hope for the best, but prepare, and learn
Yeah.
a lot about the disease. Even if you don't want to, that's the last thing you want to do, is learn about what's going to happen. But it puts you in a much better stead. So that's the
Man.
first section of the book, is to talk about the pre-diagnosis and early times, a diagnosis in early times, but what we learned together and how we planned together.
And this is a lot of this is your personal journey. So it's not all like checklists and
Oh
things like
no,
that. It's a real life story, which I love. I
right,
love these real life stories. So yeah, part two, crazy time, serious disease progression. So tell us
right.
what was happening here.
Right. So the first part of the book covers a long period of time from 2004, when Walt first started worrying about this, to all the way to 2018,
Hmm.
when we then moved into serious disease progression. And serious disease progression is when the person you're caring for needs significant help with activities of daily living. They're not dressing properly, they're no longer driving, or they should no longer be driving, and that can be a real sticky wicket with a lot of people. They might be able to prepare a simple meal, yet the simple meal that Walt prepared once when I was gone for 45 minutes was wet cat food,
Ooh.
homemade pesto, and dry dog kibble. And I got home and I went, wow. And he hadn't eaten any of it. He didn't think. So, there's a lot of need for very close supervision and day-to-day help. And so serious
Now,
disease progression is hard part.
I want to move back to part one just briefly. Like
Sure.
when you're pri prior to the serious progression, where
Hmm.
the car keys, the cat food, all of those stories that we know about, what was life like being Walt's partner before things escalated? Like what were
Right.
some of the areas that you provide and or your
Sure.
the families that you work with?
Sure. So, so he started worrying in 2004. It wasn't until 2008. He was still working. I finally dragged him to a neuropsychologist for a full neuropsych battery. And he was tested as superior to very superior in every aspect of his functioning, except for now naming, and he was normal for his age there. And his response was, I knew there was something wrong. So up until 2012, 2013, I couldn't really sense anything. And then
Hmm.
in 2013, he got retested and things were not normal for his age anymore. We were referred to a neurologist who was a gem, a goddess, as far as I'm concerned. And she helped us um, diagnose the disorder. And we did it through a spinal tap, which is now available and covered by insurance. It wasn't covered by insurance then, but it diagnosed him for sure with Alzheimer's disease. He didn't yet have dementia, so he wasn't impaired on a day-to-day function. I retired in 2016 when he started needing more help, but we took 2 years from 2016 to 2018 to travel. We took some marvelous bike trips in Europe and Massachusetts, and we traveled and we pretty much enjoyed life. It was okay until about 2018, and then it wasn't at all okay.
And and in 2018, then what were and I know you may have just shared this, but what were some of those symptoms that you started seeing?
Right. So in 2018, for example, travel no longer became an option with
Hmm.
him because he would get too anxious at the disruption of his same surroundings. And he would get so anxious that he wouldn't even be able to function. And so it wasn't worth it to him or to me to take him to the mountains, for example, or to try to go on a bike trip. He also had to stop driving at that point. He might have should have stopped driving a little bit earlier, but the crowning event was he was just driving on little errands periodically, but he made a mistake, and instead of backing up, he literally drove into our garage and
Hmm.
got pinned between the bricks and the car door, and I couldn't get him out. And it
Wow.
scared him so badly. It also broke his collarbone, scared him so badly that he basically gave up his keys willingly, and I sold the car immediately. A lot of people don't have it quite that easy.
No,
Yeah.
and in fact, actually, I'm glad you brought this up because this is a common challenge,
Yes.
especially for those of us that our own personal automobile is sort of how we define our independence or our purpose in
Yes.
life.
It's our
And
autonomy. Yes.
but I mean, when I hear stories like this, it's just thankfully it was only him that was injured and it wasn't
Yes.
worse, but imagine
Right.
if that was near a playground or something. And
Sure.
I really hope that we can come up with ways to restrict folks that have a diagnosis,
right.
in a better way.
And this is in the book on the chapter of driving into the garage, but there are resources that you can now you can hire somebody, an occupational therapist, to do an assessment with yourself or your loved one, if there's a question about driving safety, and they do a pretty complicated assessment to determine whether or not driving is appropriate. And that would
Yeah.
be, I think, yeah, there you go.
And I see
Um,
right there, chapter 16,
assessing
Walt run
drivers,
errands and straight into the garage.
right.
Um, are
And
there
assessing
any,
driver skills. Yeah.
yeah, are there any other sections of the part two of the
Yeah.
book that you wanted to share with us?
Yes. Um, what I wanted to point out a chapter, this one's chapter 19, because it's so common for people to complain about this or to hurt about this. And that chapter is called Some People Keep Us Grounded and Some Disappear. And I want to preface this by saying that there were so many people that were with us and helpful to us. And yet there are some people who just don't know what to do or can't stand the emotion of it, or they're frightened themselves. They're like, is this catchy? I don't know, and they disappear. And that makes caregivers feel very alone. Even if they have a lot of people around them, they do feel very alone and isolated. And one of the things that I do in this chapter, besides talking about my own personal experiences with the helpers and the people who left, is to talk about what we as caregivers can do. And the first thing that we can do is we can challenge ourselves to accept help. It's very common for us to go, I don't think he would be comfortable with anybody but me. And he may be
Mhm.
even telling you that. Uh, uh, he may be telling you, oh, I don't want anybody from the outside coming in. But it's very important for the caregiver to have those breaks too. So first thing you have to do is ask yourself, are you trying to do it all? Are you trying to be the perfect caregiver? And if you are, maybe let that relax a little bit, because this is a long haul. This is a marathon. It is not a 5K. It is not a sprint. So you really do have to get respite when you need it, and you get help when you can get it. Another thing I talk about in that chapter is to keep a short list of small things with you at all times, because people will say, oh, let me know if there's anything I can do for you. And sometimes it's just because they want to get the heck out of there as quickly as they can. But oftentimes people are very well-meaning and they want to do something, but they don't know what the heck to do. So if I have a list and I say, you know what, I was going to go to the grocery store this afternoon because I needed 5 things. Would you happen to be available to do that? Most people jump at the chance to do that. And the other reason I like that idea is because then it gives you a real sense of who is really wanting to be helpful and who really didn't mean to say that, and they all backpedal and make excuses. Then you have more clear guidelines about
I
who's in, who's out, who's on your team, and who's not.
I love how you have framed this, and this is something that I'm really passionate about because I call it your personal village. It's your friends, family, neighbors, members of your faith-based organization that are there to provide support to us that we don't have to write a check for. So there's an
Right?
affordability aspect to it there, and
Absolutely.
there's that benefit. But my experience is like yours, but I love the language that you used is that um it's just because somebody's blood related to you, or you think they have the capacity to help you, it may not be right. And
Yes.
something that families have shared with us that I think you brought up is that wish list that you have. I love that approach because that's a great test.
Yeah,
There
it
are
is.
so many people out there that are dying to help, and most of the time when people go through this process of building their personal village, they're often surprised that the people that they thought would be right there, supporting, are nowhere to be found. And then the folks that, a coworker's best friend is the one that's doing all the grocery shopping just
Right.
because they really want to help. I love that. I love what you've shared.
And then you also find out in retrospect that some of the people who left couldn't handle it. And you're telling yourself, oh, they just didn't care about us enough. Some of those people who just couldn't handle it were going through their own personal crisis, but they weren't sharing that because they didn't want to burden you. So there's lots of reasons. But yes, gathering your team up, you won't feel as lonely. And it's a
Yeah.
lonely process. So to be able to have a team is useful.
I love it. I love the language you're using for this. This is really so important in terms of the support and caregiving down the road. So I really appreciate the insight that you've given us. Let's see. Anything else in this part, or can we move
Well, that's
to
good. We can move to part three.
part three, which is life after Walt? And
Yes,
so tell us a little bit about this part of your life.
right. So at first, I wasn't going to have that section in the book because I felt like, gosh, this is my personal story about Walt and taking care of Walt and being a psychologist and helping other people during that time. The next part would be all about me, and it shouldn't be about me. It should be about caregiving. And then somebody rightly pointed out, this is an important piece of caregiving after your loved one dies. And this is a life-limiting illness. People absolutely die of dementia. And so I began constructing that section. And one of the things that what I already told you that I've got end of life doula training. Writing the book was therapeutic for me as well. Ultimately, very painful as I was doing it, but ultimately it was very therapeutic. Um, but I want to talk about let's see, which chapter is it? Chapter 34, survivor guilt, because survivor guilt is a huge problem for people once their loved one dies. We start asking ourselves, why them? Why not me? What did he do wrong that I didn't do wrong? I did the same wrong that he did. He was a better person than I was. How come he died and I survived? And that is survivor guilt. It's very, very common. The other common thing is called hindsight bias. And that is, I did that wrong, and I did that wrong, and I did that wrong, and I did that wrong. Why did I do that? For example, Walt had to be sedated at the very end of his life because he was very, very agitated. He was with hospice, but at home. And he badly wanted to go up the stairs for some reason. He was nonverbal at this point, but he was combative. And the hospice doctor came and she sedated him because that was really the only way he was going to be able to stay home. But after he was sedated, so he was not responsive anymore, I didn't play his music for him. And hindsight bias said to me, why didn't you play your music? Why didn't you play his music for him? Because supposedly they can still hear. Why didn't you do that? And I bludgeoned myself about that. So in the book, I talk about survivor guilt because survivor guilt is coming from the idea that we're responsible for something that wasn't controllable, and we're not. And
Mm.
hindsight bias is about you're not giving yourself credit for the things that you did. And you're just looking at the imperfection of every human being, and you're not allowing yourself the grace to have been an imperfect caregiver. And
Mm.
I like to quote the 3C rule here, which actually comes from Al Anon. You didn't cause it, you can't control it and you can't cure it. And we're just not that powerful. And I think that really helps with survival guilt and hindsight bias. And that's in that
Man.
chapter.
Oh wow. No, that this is great. And just hearing you say this, I know that people that are going to listen to this is like, "Oh, I'm feeling exactly that." In your journey or people that you guide, did you find like a support group or were you
Great
able to
question.
connect with others that were going through the same process?
Great question. So during the worst of it, we were also, well, it was pre-COVID. During the worst of it, I did find a support group at a church, and it wasn't the church that didn't jihad with me, but it was um, that support group wasn't for me. That face-to-face support group wasn't for me. But, and then COVID hit. But what really worked for me, and I'm so surprised because I wasn't even a Facebook user back then, hardly at all. One of my friends said, there are online closed Facebook support groups for spouses and partners, caregivers of people with dementia. And with great trepidation, I signed up for a few of them. And then I lurked for a couple of weeks. I just, saw what was being posted and I was horrified. And finally I posted. And then I started getting support. And the great thing about these online support groups is they're 24/7.
Yeah.
You can get up at 3 o'clock in the morning with some sort of trauma in your head and you can post. And it's usually a guilt trauma, like, I didn't do that right. There will be people out there supporting you anytime, day or night.
Yeah, I know that social media and online and all of these, there's always a critical bias is that human connection is better, but this is a different type of human connection. And I
It
think
is.
from the perspective of a caregiver, and especially if your loved one has dementia, you talked about leaving your house for 45 minutes and your husband was eating
Cat
pet
food.
food. The ability to be able to still be in close proximity to our loved ones and transform yourself to this space where people just like you are connecting all around the world, I think is wonderful. And
Yes.
a lot of
And the
times
other
people,
thing,
yeah.
yeah, the other thing that's happening now, which is so wonderful, is respite care movement. And so,
Hmm.
for example, comparatively, Tuscaloosa, Alabama is a pretty small town. We have two respite care facilities. One is a church-based one, and one is a private one. And the church-based one is for people in the early to middle stages of dementia. And it's fun activities from 11 to 2 every day, giving the caregiver the respite they need to do the things they need to do. The other one is for folks with a more severe dementia. It's a more medical care facility, but they also give them fun activities, and it's all day long. So if you still are working, and it's based on a sliding scale
Yeah.
of fee structure, and if you are working, boy, it's a godsend, and that's happening everywhere
No,
now.
it is. It's amazing. And where you're living, it may be called adult daycare or
Mhm.
respite care, different things. But for someone who is caring for someone at home, or the other area is, I mean, the cost of memory care communities is prohibitive for many people. I mean, and
Absolutely.
if you're trying to cobble together your support network, um, these options are much more affordable and
Oh,
can
absolutely.
give your loved one engagement and as well as respite or support. Um,
Yes.
so with Walt, like um, the progression, of of this to the end of his life. How long was that? Because I know that everybody's a little bit different.
Everybody is a little different. In fact, everybody's heard this before, but I like to say it. You've seen one dementia
Yeah.
patient, you've seen one dementia patient. So everybody is different. Walt had a lot of things going for him that were protective factors that provided that cognitive reserve. And so what the neurologist said is that, he would probably do quite well for quite a while. But then in retrospect, what his general practitioner said after he died is her observation is these folks that do quite well for quite a while, then they sort of go off a cliff. And his cliff was a 2-year cliff, 2018 to 2020,
Wow.
which comparatively speaking, that's not long for
No,
that
but
cliff.
I mean,
It's
but
hard.
2 years, this
Yeah.
is a long time to have a person that you love and is you've been able to communicate with, and they're a different they're a different person. It's a long
Yeah, and
journey.
really that was about 4 years, 2016 when I
Yeah,
retired because he really needed day help
yeah,
to 2020 when he
man.
passed. So, but that's a
Well,
short amount of time for many people.
oh no, I do. Yeah, decades. Some folks are
Yes.
dealing with this. Um, this is an amazing resource that you've got here and on your website at drbeverlythorn.com. Um, anything that I can't wait to have you back to dive in more to some of these topics,
Love
but
to.
anything that we haven't really talked about today, words of wisdom, and then also, if you don't mind, what are ways that people can work with you,
Right. So first of
aside
all, I
from
guess
buying the
my
book? Yeah.
so so I'm not in psychological practice anymore. I haven't hung out a shingle for a while, but I do still write. I do still a lot of speaking and to groups, to caregiving groups. I do a lot of speaking and that sort of thing, Zoom and travel. And my fee is really very reasonable. It's
Oh, wow.
I ask I ask for travel expenses, but other than that, and so people do contact me through the website, and I do respond to them. And wouldn't it be a great problem to have if I got so many contacts that I couldn't by myself respond to everybody, and I have to hire a young psychologist to help me?
I love it. Well, hopefully we'll help spread the word about your book, about you as a resource to other folks that are on this journey. Um, yeah, so anything else that we might want to be thinking about?
Yeah, I think one thing that people are surprised by when they read the book, well, a couple of things. They're surprised that, oh, this caregiving stuff that you talked about is relevant to any caregiving. I had a person, I was given a talk for the Rotary Club, and he said, my wife had ALS, and everything you said in this book is relevant. This isn't dementia specific. The other thing is people are surprised by adult children, for example, are surprised that this book is helpful to them, even though they're not living with their parent, and they're in fact they're sort of removed. It's so helpful to help them understand what their parents are going through, and
Oh
it
yeah.
also helps people. It helps people with their guilt. I wasn't
Mm,
available enough, or their grief. I don't know how I'm going to go on living. It helps those things too. So it's wider than just how to care for yourself while you're a caregiver.
I love it, man. Well, Beverly, this has been wonderful, and like I said, I look forward to having you back on. But
Great.
I am gonna scream from the rooftops that you're a resource out there, and hopefully some of our community members will get your book, reach out, and be inspired uh, by your story that you've so shared so well. So
Thank you so much.
thanks,
Thanks for
thank
having
you.
me.
You
All
bet.
right.